Okay, we're going to call to order the regular meeting of the Board of Education. Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda?
Yes.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Are there any comments from the public? Anyone want to come forward and offer any thoughts? Seeing no one, there'll be a second public comment period at the end of the meeting. Consent agenda. Has everyone had a chance to review the consent agenda?
Yes.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved. I have a brief chairman's report. First, I'd like to remind everyone that Dr. Smith, Superintendent Smith, will present his proposed operating budget to the community next Monday evening, that's February 11th, at 7 p.m. in the Middlebrook Auditorium. Dr. Smith has developed a budget that fully funds our educational priorities and asks for a 1.35% increase in spending, which is below the 1.6% guidance that we were given by the Board of Finance. This is community members' opportunity to hear and be heard, so I encourage everyone to attend if possible. We also have a workshop scheduled for next Thursday, February 14th, with the Board of Finance to discuss the budget and to answer any of their questions. That workshop will take place here in this room at 7:30, and the public is invited to that. I'd also like to give a quick update on SB 454, which of course is the misdirected legislative proposal that would force regionalization of most local school districts in Connecticut. Last Thursday, our board unanimously approved a letter of opposition to the two education co-chairs. We continue to be in good contact with our elected officials. Representative Lavielle informs us that the Education Committee, of which she is a member, will meet on Monday, February 11th, this coming Monday again, during which a decision will be made about whether or not to proceed. Representative Lavielle suggests this issue is going to be around for a while, and that while our letters in opposition are making a difference, we really need to keep the heat up. I've had people ask how the issue is being received in other Durgay districts. So I reached out to all the board chairs in those districts this afternoon. I've heard back from 3 or 4, and I think it's fair to say every board is highly aware of the topic, and almost all have publicly come out in opposition. I was pleased to have one board chair say that her board and community are paying close attention to the events taking place in Wilton, as we have really established ourselves as leaders on this issue. So as I said, our board is committed to defeating this bill, and we are in it for the long haul.
Great.
Superintendent's report.
Tuesday, I'll be attending the Trumbull Board of Education to attempt to inspire them to also get in the game and share the opposition to this, because Trumbull, like every other smaller community in the state, would be impacted. So I'll let you know how that goes. Just 2 other quick updates. I want to just take a minute to recognize our high school unified sports team. Earlier this week, during the halftime of our boys varsity basketball game, our high school was presented with a unified champion banner in honor of being recognized as a national unified champion school. So I want to congratulate our high school and our players.
Great. Congratulations.
Earlier today, I had the great pleasure of spending about an hour and a half with Kim and with Kathy Weiss, who is our high school social worker, and a group of about 15 or 16 parents discussing the Julia Lithgott-Hames book that you've heard me go on and on about, How to Raise an Adult. We had a really great conversation, and it ranged from kind of pressures around parenting, but also, very hopeful, or what are the strategies that, parents can use, and how can parents support each other. So I was happy to participate and facilitate that conversation. We have a second one coming up on March 13th at 10 a.m. at Comstock. If you'd like the book, I'd be happy to get you a copy. That's it.
Great, thank you. Committee reports.
Hey.
Business ops.
Yeah, ops. We met this morning primarily to discuss the capital plans, which we'll see later. And that was the really primary topic of conversation. I think Chris is here tonight with Jose.
Yes.
Jose will be here to talk about those in great detail. And from our perspective, it certainly makes sense. And the effort to plan out over a 5-year horizon is finally in place. and it seems to be well thought out and well planned, so you'll get the details of that later in tonight's meeting. And then we briefly spoke about the budget presentation coming up on Monday and the information and how the information is going to be presented. And that was really it. Okay.
Great. Debbie, do you have anything to add?
Oh, good summary, thanks.
Okay. Teaching and learning?
Yes, we met yesterday, went over a few things. First, as I may have mentioned previously, over the course of the spring, we're going to revisit the 4161, no, I'm sorry. I
61,
jumped ahead, never mind. The first thing we discussed was new requirements for graduation, because there are new state standards that take us to 25 credits for graduation, and this will have an impact starting with the class of 2023. So Bob and Don came by and they walked us through where they are so far in that whole process, and as that gets put together, it will then translate into policy and procedure, which will then go to the policy committee, and then will come to the board for review and approval. So I just want you to know that that was in the works. It all looked really good to us. The next thing we talked about was something that our HR director is, Maria Coleman, is taking up, and that is developing a Wilton Public Schools candidate profile for teachers. They're looking at basically answering the question, what does a teacher in Wilton look like? What are the qualities that we're looking for? And they're developing logos and things like that, so that when they go to these job fairs, you know, they could have information and brochures, and how do we brand ourselves as a school community? And so that's something that her group, with Ken Denage, the humanities coach at the high school, have been working on with her whole committee, and as you get further along in their work, they'll be bringing that to the board as well for review. And 6141 is what I started to say. Over the course of the spring, the T&L committee is taking a closer look at the 6141 process, which, if you recall, is the process by which new courses, new instructional programs are introduced and brought to the board. So we're just kind of updating it, making sure it's a process that works for everybody, it's a process that's all-encompassing, you know, K through 12, versus we've been using it primarily just for the high school. So as we continue to work, and it's not something that needs to be done tomorrow, so that's why it's going to be on our agenda for the next several meetings as we continue to just kind of continue to tweak it and update it and make it better and better. And so eventually, again, that will come back to the board by way of the policy and communications committee, updating it and then bringing it to the board for approval. And lastly, this wasn't T&L, but Tuesday of this week, I had the pleasure of visiting Middlebrook School at Principal Lauren Feltz's invitation. I met with Lauren and Karen Brennicke, who is the K-8 Humanities Coordinator, and Susanna Prada, who is the Middlebrook Humanities Coach. And they talked to me through what they have done since last spring in terms of developing a unit that covers the Holocaust and genocide for grade 7. And they talked to me about the training and curriculum development that they've been going through, and the people that they've been engaging, the organizations from the state level. Mr. Social Studies, we call him, of Connecticut, has been greatly involved with this, and I invited them that after they launch this, which is planned for end of February, March timeframe, to come back to the board and present to us how it went and give us feedback on all of it. And I'm sure, based on what I heard the other day, there's going to be a lot of good news stories to share. And at that meeting, I was very happy to share with them a book that was given to me by a Wilton resident by the name of Rena Eidelberg, whose kids have long gone out of the, not long gone, but have graduated
He's
through
only
the
a freshman
system.
in college.
Okay. That seems like a long time ago, almost last year. Where she was at our last June meeting, and she was one of the people from the public who came and spoke, and she was really moved by the whole event. And so she donated to us the book called I Never Saw Another Butterfly, which is a collection of children's drawings and poems from the concentration camps from 1942 to 1944. And she donated that as a gift to us to include as a resource. And so I thought that was a perfect opportunity for me to pass it on. And so they now have that at Meadowbrook. So we look forward to welcoming your group here. Maybe we thought sometime in an early April board meeting, we can hear from that group.
Are there any questions for Lori or Laura on that? Is the Holocaust unit, is that like a historical focus, or is it?
It's a social studies unit, which is in alignment with the new legislation. And it's been developed with a tremendous amount of training for the 7th grade social studies teachers, with working with some really great support. So be happy to come with a report on that.
That's wonderful. I look forward to that.
They've been doing great work, I have to say. Karen Brennicke, Susanna Prada, and also the Library Learning Commons, 7th grade teachers. And we also have a teacher who's had some really wonderful learning experiences, Jackie Scarangella, who's been working with us. And as you referred to, we have the gentleman, Steve Armstrong, who's the top in the state in social studies, and he also selected 3 additional consultants for us to work with. So that team, I just can't say enough great things about the 7th grade social studies teachers and the work they've done. So it's a completely redesigned unit, and it has moved from living in historical fiction in reading class to actual social studies, which is where it really belongs.
Great, thank you. Policy and communications?
So we are meeting on Tuesday.
Great.
And we'll have more news next week.
A lot to talk about after that. Okay, thank you. Review and discuss Wilton Public Schools capital plan.
Great. At this time, I'd like to invite our Director of Facilities and our Supervisor of Facilities, Chris Burney and Jose Figueroa. Chris is going to take us through the 5-year bonded capital plan, and then Jose will walk us through the 5-year operating capital plan.
Before we go into the capital, I spoke to Kevin today, and I wanted to just spend a minute or two talking about 3 things that affect the Board of Education and the town, because of somewhat unique perspective. I have jurisdiction over both of them. Trash is a very confusing line item these days. When China stopped taking the recyclable content of the world, nobody really believed it until they'd stopped taking it. The net result of that is we currently get about $20 a ton from city carting for our recyclable product. In the next fiscal year, we will be paying $65 a ton. That's an $85 a ton switch in the wrong direction. If that makes you feel bad, Google Stanford and their problems. They went from a $90,000 credit to a $750,000 expense item. Our recycling station processes about 1,000 tons of recyclables a year, so the impact on the town is about an $85,000 budget hit. We take cardboard from the schools, which we get money for, but not as much. It's still cheaper to recycle than it is to put trash out. We pay about $90 a ton for routine trash. We haul our trash from the transfer station down to Norwalk, and from there it goes up to the waste-to-energy plant in Bridgewater. We're expecting a general 6% increase net of any increases for recycling. We've started negotiations. I met with the city carting people 2 weeks ago, and we are trying to seek some opportunistic ways that we can give them better quality recyclable so they don't have to spend as much time processing it, and they can get a better price for it. So if we can save money, they can make more money, we can meet in the middle. That's an opportunity. The board's trash program is a little different. We don't pay for the tonnage. Our trash and our recyclable material is removed on a per pickup basis, and we negotiate the cost of them coming and picking it up and dumping it. It's a little less, as we can't control it that well because we don't know when the containers are full, and we don't know how much we're dumping. But the reason for that process is we don't want trash containers sitting around the schools for 2, 3, 4 days a week with trash in them, flies, and whatever else is coming. So there are two different models at play. I'm trying to meld them both. We're going to end up with a single contract with the trash hauler. If we don't reach satisfaction in negotiations, and we have the opportunity to extend our contract, we'll put it out on the street and bid it and see if somebody will come in with a more, a better rate for us to save money. I wanted to talk about diesel fuel. The town provides the Board of Ed with the diesel fuel for the buses. We just came off a long-term, very good contract last August. When we came off the contract, we hit the market, and we didn't have a new contract in place. The market at the time was 40% more, plus or minus, than we were paying. We spend about $200,000 on diesel for the buses, so we put in a placeholder of 40% of 200 as an increase. That did not make us popular. This morning I got notice, and I don't negotiate that contract, I got notice that we had a new contract. It looks like the increase is going to be less than 20%. I need to go back and see what we've spent already, and then what we will go by at the new rate, and then we can modify the increase that was in the budget. And the last thing I just wanted to mention was electrical. And it's a little complicated. We have had a 10-year contract with a company called TransCanada, and we bought the power from them, and we paid Eversource to ship it to us. It's a fairly common arrangement. They went out of the business in September of last year. They assigned it to a new company and our contracts ended in December. So that saved us a couple of pennies a kilowatt hour. We no longer have that opportunity. We are buying all of our power from Eversource on what's known as the market rate. The reason we haven't got a new contract is that you may have read or may have heard that we're working with the town of Weston to participate in a virtual net metering solar program. Simply said, we're contracting with a vendor who is going to build a solar plant, doesn't matter where. They will put the power on the grid, and we will pay Eversource to take it at a reduced rate. We have arranged that the majority of our savings will go to the high school account. The potential is for $60,000, $70,000 reduction in our energy cost. We don't have the contract signed. They do not have approval to build the plant. It's at the Connecticut Siting Council right now, who are not the most responsive of agencies when it comes to speed. So we can't take those savings out of our budget. But if it's approved, it will be a nice budget improvement, sorry. The reason we haven't negotiated a new contract is we don't know yet how much power we're going to take from the virtual net metering. And until I get that number, I can't go to a third-party supplier and nominate how much power I want to buy from them. Because you can't just say, we'll buy power. They want to know how much. And some of them have a take or pay. Well, you said you were going to take this. I'm charging you for it anyway. I don't want to get in those situations. So we need to bite the bullet for a little while. Hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll have everything put in order, and we can have a new third-party contract. And while we're talking solar, you know they have solar panels on Miller Driscoll and Middlebrook. It appears that they are exceeding our performance expectations. We are looking at over $60,000 worth of savings for those two schools. We have approval for another project on the high school, which we originally intended to put on the fieldhouse roof. When we did the due diligence, we discovered that the fieldhouse roof could not support the structural weight of the panels. We've identified two other roofs. The system will be a little smaller, but it should still save another $20,000, $25,000 a year for the high school. We do need to replace those roofs before we put the solar on. So let's go to the capital budget, the bonded capital budget. The first line represents what I and my consultant estimate that it's going to cost us to replace mostly, and some repair, the roofs on all of the schools. Now, all of the schools, obviously Miller Driscoll is not included, it's brand new, there are no problems. But the high school, Cider Mill, and Middlebrook have roofs that go back to the 90s. which is really out of their useful life. And if we don't start to address this in a planned way, we're gonna come back one day and say, I got a leak there and we can't do anything, and close the school. So that's that number. We did spend close to $40,000 on a detailed survey of the roofs. We did physical walkovers, we did infrared photography, because when the roof is wet, the insulation's wet, it transmits heat. When it's dry, it stops heat, and that's the way it's supposed to work. So the infrared photography shows you different light variations where the roof's wet and dry. We did some nuclear testing, which is another way of non-destructive moisture testing. We have, each report comes in at about 60, 70 pages, and that is what we're basing our long-term plan on. I'm very comfortable with it. The company that did the work is a national company, and we are working on a national cooperative purchasing program, which means that we can deal with this company. We are allowed to do that by statute. We can save money on bidding processes, creating detailed drawings and specs, architects. We're working with the manufacturers. Replace the high school elevators. Connecticut changed its elevator code a year or so ago, and it became effective in the last year. The high school elevators were installed in the early 70s. That means they've been working almost as long as Glenn and I have. Not quite, but
Not quite.
the problem is that they are hydraulic elevators, not cable. And the hydraulic fluid sits in a shaft, goes into a reservoir, and that's what moves the elevator. These shafts are single wall construction. So if there's a leak or a failure, there's no way to stop the hydraulic fluid polluting the ground. The state has said, no more, you have to replace them. There are 3 elevators at the high school. I'm planning to replace 1 this summer and 2 next summer. The caveat is I'm going to have to get an extension from the state on an approved plan of replacement because it's a little outside their required time frame. I don't think that's going to be a problem, but that's where we're at. It's a similar requirement on Cider Mill. We need to do some, and it's not, I said upgrades, it's additional safety edges, safety equipment, all the things that we don't have, that we did with the Middlebrook elevator that we replaced last summer. But that's going to cost another couple of hundred. I have a little more leniency with that time frame, so that would be done in '22. The next item is the Cider Mill parking lot. It is in pretty bad shape. There are a lot of curbs that have been damaged by, unfortunately, my plow drivers from DPW, not these guys. But it just has to be done. We're gonna upgrade the lighting at the same time we have access to the ground. There's some catch basin repairs that need to be done. $400,000. We'll have a brand new parking lot, brand new driveway. We actually did repave part of the driveway last year. It's just a mess, and it's becoming a hazard to walk, particularly at night where some of these cracks are 3 inches wide and you don't see them. So that's parking. We've embarked on a program to get rid of all of the old stained carpet in the high school, Middlebrook, and Cider Mill. And part of that is following the success of the vinyl tile in the corridors at Miller Driscoll, which is so much easier to maintain with the right equipment, and it's so much easier to see when it has been maintained. Because you can not maintain a carpet for a month and it doesn't really show any difference, particularly when it's 10 years old. We are planning to do Cider Mill this summer. We're closing Cider Mill for a whole bunch of work, and Jose will talk about some of it. And then we'll do Cider Mill this summer. We'll do Middlebrook next summer. And then the following 2 summers, we'll do the high school. High school is going to cost $800,000, give or take, and it's going to take 2 years to do it. But at the end of the day, we'll have a more environmentally friendly, brighter looking, cleaner schools. The next item is a little more subjective. I had it in the budget last year and I pushed it back another couple of years because we were front loading so much money. Middlebrook and Cider Mill do not have complete air conditioning systems. Not all of the areas are air conditioned. And the air conditioning system they have depends on 100% fresh air. Well, that is an extremely inefficient system. If you think of an operating room as being high standard air conditioning, a typical operating room in a hospital only brings in 20% fresh air. It recirculates 80% of the air. We need to get to a system that does that, because that literally will save 60% of the utility costs. It also allows for better control of moisture. Dehumidification is really hard to do when you're working with outside air at 85 degrees and 70% humidity. And if you don't control moisture, the downside of that is you get potential problems with mold. So that's a $2.1 million project. That budget is a little soft, but the $100,000 at the beginning is to start the investigation and design of the project. That would need to go to bid, and then we do one school each summer. And then the last item, and this is something that's new, and I talked to Dr. Smith about this. Middlebrook and Cider Mill schools have no emergency power, period. So if we have an ice storm and the power goes out for a week or 3 days, and it's 0 or whatever that temperature is outside, we're going to freeze the school, literally. And if we freeze the school and we get burst pipes, you could have that school offline for at least weeks, maybe months. And I don't know that that's acceptable. So I think, and I'll argue against myself, it's not acceptable. But the schools have been there for a long time, and it's never happened. So there's a cost-benefit analysis, a risk-benefit analysis. I'm putting it out here saying I think we need to do it, but at this point, I think we seek the board's guidance, and I'm not sure that this will make it through the bonded capital process. When I did discuss it at the town, the reaction was basically shock. What do you mean there's no emergency power? Miller Driscoll has has enough emergency power to stay warm. It is a secondary designated warming center. Comstock is the primary for the town. And the high school has partial emergency power, enough that we can not freeze while we are in a power failure mode. So that's the capital bonded request. I think there's still some debate on some of the items that we could have. But it is my best opinion as to what we need to be spending the money on in the next 5 years.
Want to jump into operating?
Sure.
Well, I was tasked by Dr. Smith to come up with a 5-year plan of operating and basically write everything down that needed to be done in our facilities. So I put that together. A lot of the money that we put aside, the big chunks of it, it's mainly for furniture, but I'll start from the top, building maintenance. Miller Driscoll, which is a fairly new building, doesn't need too much attention. It's just the $2,000 is just general upkeep to keep the paint in the walls, just to keep it nice and pretty. Cider Mill, I put $25,000 in next year. We have money put aside since the building's going to be taken offline to do all this repair work, the ceiling tile replacement, LED lights, carpet replacement. So I have some money put aside to try to finish. Last year we did Cannondale, and I believe the house that's above, Jen, Nod Hill. We painted both houses last year. We did it internally. We painted all the classrooms, corridors, so it looked nice. So this year we're going to try to get Belden Hill done, and then if we don't have enough funding to do it, I put money aside to do the remaining building. So that building should be pretty much all in pretty good shape by 2020. Then if you go into fiscal year 21, that $55,000 represents expansion cracks on the exterior of the building. We have some areas where there's cracks that are coming up that we want to address, and also there's $30,000 put in there for to re-insulate the chiller, the insulation that comes in, the main feed that comes into the building. So that represents the $55,000. Middlebrook, We have $3,800. A lot of that is to address the lighting that's around the auditorium. There's all these cans that are no longer working, so we want to put newer LED lights in there so that we could get some nice lighting around that part of the building. I did the same thing for 2021 because I wanted to kind of continue that same thing around the back side of the building, just to create some nice bright lighting. Same thing with the high school. In the front entrance, the underhang of the central office, there's cans that are no longer working. We want to put in some nice bright LED lights. So a lot of this is more, addressing the lighting need that we need in our districts in the buildings. Then if you go to the equipment, for Miller Driscoll, they got nothing. The building's brand new. It's nice, beautiful. Cider Mill, we didn't put anything in this coming year, but the following year we have a freezer that it's in our cafeteria that needs to be have some serious repair work done. So that's the $10,000 there. Cider Mill, we have in year 2021 is to purchase a auto scrubber so that we're able to maintain the corridors. Now that we're transitioning to VCT tile, we're equipped now to run shampoo machines. So we're trying to get the equipment to maintain it. So that's the $15,000 there. And as you can see, there's really nothing else that we need because we'll be in pretty good shape at Middlebrook. The high school, same thing. In the year 2021, I have one auto scrubber that we're going to purchase, and that's to replace the existing auto scrubber we have in our field house, which is approaching almost 20 years. So it's starting to get to a point where we're spending more money to repair it, so it's about time to replace it. And then I also have in there PA upgrades. I'm working with Eric Hawkinson on coming up with a plan to tackle the issues we have at the high school with areas that are not being able to get announcements. So we have a plan in place for that. In year 2022, same thing. We were going to purchase another auto scrubber for the corridors because we're going to have 3 floors that are going to need to be maintained. And then there's also other like custodial equipment, vacuums, equipment for them to maintain the floor tile much better. If you notice, the district kind of spiked up. There's quite a bit of money, and it's consistent through the 5 years. We have $20,000 in every year for the new phones that we have. We put $5,000 in each building, just in case if there's any repairs or we have to add any new extensions or relocate phones. So that represents that kind of consistent number throughout the district. Furniture, again, like I said, furniture is a big ticket item. I think whenever there's time to cut the budget, facilities always gets cut, and that's the first thing that goes is furniture. So I think we're at a point in time now in our district that we really need to start addressing the classroom furniture. And it's a perfect time because we just went to a meeting, it's bold moves for schools, which was amazing. The classroom setups, the furniture, the mobile furniture. I mean, it's mind blowing. So that's the type of equipment that we're looking to purchase for our classroom, so that the classroom will be ready for the 21st century learning. So, but you could see how the numbers are. Miller Driscoll in 2021, there's 20,000. 20,000 represents a full furnished classroom. That's what it would cost, $20,000, from a teacher's desk, chair, to students, tables, movable whiteboard. Movable smart board. So it's a nice room. It's put together very well. Grounds and landscaping. The big ticket item there is Middlebrook, the courtyard. We have a serious issue in our courtyard at Middlebrook. Whenever we get any steady downflow of rain, that courtyard fills right up. And every time it rains pretty heavy and it's at night, I'm up thinking about, oh man, am I going to come into a building where there's water in the cafeteria? So it's been like that for years, so I think it's time to address it. So that represents that $108,000. If you go down to remodeling and major repairs, Cider Mill, there's just basically, let me get my parents here. That represents addressing the restroom partitions. Our partitions in our restrooms are starting to get to a point, they're metal. They're starting to rust from spraying them down with the machines, and they're getting really raggedy. So with these new partitions, they're more of a plastic material, which is much more durable. So I put a dollar amount for every year to try to address 2 sets of restrooms. So it's kind of consistent as it goes through. I think I might have added in 21 and 22, I try to get a bulk of those rooms. It's typically around $8,000 to do 1 set of restrooms. So it adds up pretty quick, but it's something that definitely needs attention as you go through the district. The high school is not that bad. Middlebrook is not that bad. There's certain areas that need to be done. But then you get to Middlebrook in 2021, there's $233,000. That's basically to replace all the ceiling tiles in the building, upgrade the lighting to LED 2x2 light fixtures. Also to, give me a second, sorry. That's also to address the boys' locker room and the girls' locker room. We've painted the locker rooms. We gave it a facelift just to kind of buy time, but we're at a point now where it needs to be addressed. I mean, some of the locker spaces, I don't even know how the students put anything in them. So it's just gotten to that point. So that's where the $233,000 and then $125,000 come in. We try to split it up between 2 years. So that's pretty much the 5-year. I mean, there's more. I have a 6 to 10 years, and that kind of leads to more catering to the high school because we try to follow suit. We went with Miller Driscoll. Now we're going to Cider Mill. The following year we'll do Middlebrook, and then the year after that we'll do the high school. So I think we did a pretty good job of identifying everything. I mean, everything that's known to us. I mean, so it's there. So that's my 5-year operating. There's vehicles, sorry. In 2022, we're looking to replace our rack body, which is one of the vehicles that we use to bring pretty much all our cardboard to the transfer station. The rack body that we currently have it's past like 15 years old. It's at this point, so where it's at its last leg. So that represents that, and then we have another vehicle down the road, a smaller V6 to kind of get the jump on the curbs and kind of hit around the back of the building. But we're in need of it, so that's my budget.
Great, thank you. Questions?
Did you say the rat body?
Yeah, rack body.
A rack, okay.
Yes, yeah, sorry.
Those are big. Don't remember that.
Yeah.
Can you wait that long to buy one?
We can. We just had it serviced and repaired. We spent $10,000. That's why once we spent that $10,000, I said it's time to put it in the budget. I think we'll be able to wait the additional years to get it done. By that time, we'll take it offline.
Okay.
I don't see any expenditures for like the field house.
That's
floors.
year 6. I had that
Oh.
conversation with Glenn. It's starting to look into replacing the field house floor. Also, we have the restrooms in the field house that needs to be addressed. So it's there, but it's just kind of trying to follow suit of Miller, Cider Mill, Middlebrook, and then the high school.
Thank you.
No, go.
All right, Glenn and I had the opportunity to hear Jose this morning and look at some of the bonded as well. And I just want to commend everyone for how comprehensive this is and how well thought out and well researched and well vetted, and the rationale is very clear. And I think it helps with predictability and all of that. And it's proactive versus waiting for something to blow up or fall down or implode or whatever facilities can do, and that's all of it. Just a question about the emergency power. You said that it was a little, up for discussion. Does that mean that you want the board to weigh in, or what should the process on that piece be?
It's a large number. And as I said, if you do a risk-benefit, the benefit is you don't have to worry about the schools freezing. What's the risk? Because in the 30-odd years they've been around, they haven't frozen. But I just thought it's something that needs to be brought to the table. And there are 2 ways to do it. We can simply say, we'll get a generator big enough to power the school, everything. And that's the simplest way. Then it becomes just like a secondary feed from the utility. That's a big generator. But you could do a smaller generator, but it will cost you more to do because now you have to create dedicated emergency circuits and new switchgear inside. So I've taken the pricing approach that we'll put one big generator in, we'll connect it to everything, and we're done with it. It makes me nervous, and I have a different perspective on this now that I have Public Works. Every time we get an ice storm and a windstorm, there's trees down, there's lines down. We lost power at Middlebrook for half a day this year.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a wake-up call. I
Right.
would recommend that we do it.
Okay, so do we vote to approve? I'm looking at the
This will be,
process.
on the 21st again, we'll have a vote to approve the
Got it,
recommendations.
okay, got it.
Right.
Well, I just want to support your thinking, as somebody who worked in a neighboring town whose weather is a little bit worse, but it could hit Wilton fairly easily. We had to close school twice for an entire week. And if the temperatures had been that cold, it would have been huge damage. So I think the risks are too big, and it seems that even though it hasn't happened yet, that hasn't been a great rationale for some of the weather events we've had. So I think it's a wise investment. That's my personal opinion. And then the last thing I just wanted to note that I picked up this morning is that on the 5-year operating capital, these are all necessary and well thought out and paced and the whole bit. But I do think the board should note that between this year and next year, there'll be a large increase that will represent a good 0.5% or more on the budget if we stick to this plan. So that's a given.
It's a
Anyway,
$500 million
thank you.
increase, big jump.
Well, if our virtual net metering program goes through, and every time Jose talks about changing the lights to LED, we're reducing the power bill. The power use at the schools for the last 3 years has steadily dropped. And unfortunately, use does not necessarily correlate with cost, but we are avoiding costs by a lot of the things that we're doing. Jose mentioned a lot of times he wants to change the lights out for LED lights. That's a bonus right there. So I think we will be able, hopefully with the solar at the high school that has not been booked to the budget, the virtual net metering, which has not been booked to the budget, because I can't until I get it, because if I don't get it, I'm in trouble. Now we know we have a reduced increase in our diesel, and the next utility project for me is to start going out into the open market and trying to see where I can buy natural gas cheaper than paying Eversource. So there are opportunities to reduce cost as we go forward, and a lot of what we're doing in improving the facility is actually helping us reduce costs.
Sure.
No, I want to second what Deborah said, that we have perhaps a history here of delaying or putting off and wait till next year with a lot of, huh? You know?
No, you just said perhaps. I'm like, I think we can say we do.
We do, have had, and this is really the first comprehensive look at a good, solid 5-year, here are the things that need to happen over the next 5 years, thought out, planned, et cetera. And it makes sense, and hopefully we'll avoid a lot of the, many of the issues that we have faced recently in our recent past about delayed maintenance, lack of upkeep. So I think it's well thought out, and it's something that I would highly recommend that we approve and move forward with. So it's well done.
I just had maybe requesting a confirmation. You had mentioned the roof replacements that needed to be done because of the solar, but it sounds also like the roof needs to be replaced whether or not we put solar on it anyway.
Yes, we have a tight window to work on the roof. We can't start till school's out. There are potential odor issues, safety issues, so we need to replace the roof. We are contractually obligated to have the solar system functional by, I think it's October 15. So I need to get on the roof and off the roof, then the solar can start installation, and we will commission it and have it functioning. Otherwise, we lose a significant value of the savings. We have to pay a penalty, basically, because we've had it on the books for 2 years, almost 2 years.
Okay.
So, yes, we need to cram it all into the summer. We will be finishing the solar after school comes back in September, but we did Miller Driscoll and Middlebrook. Dr. Smith and I talked about whether that would work, and he said, if they complain, you stop. And thank you to the schools, they didn't complain. And so we got the systems installed. The solar can go on while the school's in session, but I need to do the roofs first. And yes, the roofs would be done, should be done, regardless. The selection of these two roofs is a function of the solar system. There are other roofs that need to get done, but there's only so much roof work can be done in any summer.
So the other roofs that also need to get done are not included in this?
They are.
No, they are.
They are? Okay.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is meant
It's
to
not
cover.
whole roof replacement, it's kind of piece,
Yeah.
Okay.
because that's how it's been done. So we have roofs that are, different ages.
I think Middlebrook probably has, 6 different roof sections on it over different times, or whatever the number is. It's pretty,
Yeah, at least.
at least 6 different sections, and they've all been done at different times. So this proposal deals with the solar needs and the regular normal roof repair, roof updating, roof replacement needs.
What sort of penalty would we face if we didn't meet the October 15th deadline for the solar installation?
Unfortunately, it's the town's penalty because we're the lessee or whatever. I think we have to pay something like $8,000, and then we are also losing a year of savings
Right.
because it's a time-specific contract.
Any other questions? Anything?
No.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Review and discuss the Wilton High School bell schedule.
Good evening. Well, we hope you're as excited about this proposal as we are. We're in the presence of greatness with Scott Webster, one of our instructional leaders, and Kevin Connolly, one of our FAPA teachers. And what we want to do is we want to present the schedule, the big reveal, show you the schedule, and talk you through the facets of it. Scott's going to talk about some of the issues and concerns with the old schedule. Kevin, Scott, and I are going to talk about the benefits of the new alternating AB schedule. And then I'm going to talk about the professional learning plan, how are we going to get our teachers ready to teach our students at the level that we expect and anticipate. And Don is going to talk about the communication plan. Okay?
Great.
So we wanted to start right away with the pièce de résistance, which is the schedule itself. And you have a copy of it in your packets, and Lucille has put it up on the smart boards for us. And I'm going to talk you through the individual facets of this schedule and the features and why we feel it's the right schedule for our students and our staff. Everybody have a copy?
Yep.
Okay. So you'll notice here we have 2 schedules, and this is an alternating AB schedule, so a block schedule. The periods on the main schedule are 85 minutes in length, which is what we thought would be the sweet spot instructionally. You'll notice there are 4 85-minute periods. You'll also notice there are 7-minute passing times. The passing times right now are 5 minutes, so we're adding 2 minutes for our students to be less rushed, less harried, to get from one point of the building to the other and to give them a little bit of a longer break between the periods. So we felt that was important, and we've had some good parental and student feedback on that. Those who know our current schedule will notice that we've gone back to 4 lunch waves, and the reason for that is we had to balance the periods or the blocks instructionally. So you'll notice these blocks are 85, 85. The lunch wave is 85 to 86 minutes, depending on which wave the students take. And we think that with 4 lunch waves of a little bit shorter length, right now we have 30-minute lunch waves. These ones you'll notice are 28 to 29 minutes. Students will still have plenty of time to eat, have some time for relaxing, enjoy the zero waste policy in the program, and make their way back to their classes. One of the things you will notice, and this is a little bit of a detractor from this schedule, but it's actually a product of our late start. You might have noticed that the lunch waves start later now, will start later with this schedule, and they'll finish later. So essentially, with us starting later than other block schools, we had a choice whether to embed the lunch waves into the second block or the third block. And in the second block, it would have just started too early, students starting lunch at 9:52. So we decided to embed them in the third block, which makes a lot of sense. So Those are the main highlights of the main schedule. And again, we feel, and Scott and Kevin will talk a little about this as well, we feel that with 85-minute blocks, fewer passing times, we'll have a more relaxed school day, less stressful, fewer transitions, opportunities for deeper personalized learning, teachers not continually rushing to teach students and students to learn. So we think it's just going to be value added. It's also noteworthy that, you know, one of the paramount ideas was we wanted to really preserve instructional time. So this main schedule compared to the current main schedule, there's actually 11 more minutes daily. So we're gaining 11 minutes. Multiply that by 181, depending on whether it's a warrior advisory day or a regular day. So we're actually gaining instructional time. We feel very good about that. And the advisory schedule actually has 11 more minutes as well. So that was important, okay? So we had originally 3 different schedules. We had a main schedule, a warrior day schedule, which was going to be about advisory, and then one was going to be for what we were kind of calling a flex day, which is now actually called warrior white, just semantically. So if you look at the second schedule here, you'll notice that that is our advisory day. We're calling it a warrior day. And you'll notice, of course, that we have time carved out for either the advisory period, warrior blue, 3 times a month, essentially, or the warrior white schedule, which is 1 time a month. So the current advisory period is 25 minutes, so that remains the same. That's the sweet spot that we found for the length of advisory. We've had advisories a little bit shorter, we've had them a little bit longer. We found that this works for our students and teachers. And you'll notice on the Warrior White Day, this is worthy of a little bit of conversation here. So the vision for the Warrior White Day, which would happen once a month, is kind of what you might describe as a flex day, where students would have the opportunity to do a number of things. They could meet with a teacher, they could get some extra help and support, they could make up a test or a quiz or any materials that they may have missed. We could hold during that time enrichment activities. We can hold during that time our school climate team meeting. So there are a lot of opportunities here to capitalize on some time when our students are so rushed to make things up before and after school. And we see students, you've seen the students constantly in our school before school starts and after school. And we recognize they're largely oversubscribed. So we feel this is seizing an opportunity to take some of the pressure off of students and let them do some things during the instructional day that they otherwise would be really hard-pressed to do. One of the discussions we've had recently, we could do small wellness modules during the flex block, during the warrior white block. So we have to flesh that out a little bit more. Strategically next year, we would begin the school year with 3 warrior blue days, so 3 advisories to transition our students back, to transition our freshmen to the high school. And then on the 4th week, we'd have time to really prepare. And we recognize the importance of structuring these warrior white days so that students are doing something that is beneficial and important and instructional and relates to teaching and learning. So more to come on that. If you look at the bottom of the schedule, this is the rotation. So a couple of the features that we felt here that we wanted to retain was, you will notice we still have a double rotation built in. So periods 1, 2, 3, and 4 rotate through the morning rotation so that we can still have part-time teachers who may be just here in the morning or the afternoon. We have students who can still go to, for example, RCA, Regional Center for the Arts. Students can still go out in career practicum and have vocational opportunities. And then in the afternoon, we have periods 5, 6, 7, and 8. Of course, the advantage as well as students and teachers not always starting with the same period, and the last period of the day is different as well. So for example, if there's an athletics early dismissal, it may not have the risk of always impacting the same periods, similar to the current schedule. The cadence, I talked about the cadence of the warrior blue versus warrior white days. What we envisioned, we debated whether to just roll the schedule or whether to have the warrior day just on a Wednesday, and that's where we're landing, because we think that students and teachers will recognize, okay, today is the day where we have a special schedule, and then they just have to pay attention to, is it a warrior blue day, or is it the one warrior white day, which is more the flex schedule. So it says draft for a reason. We're still getting some feedback from staff. Don's going to talk about how we're going to thoughtfully roll this out to parents. We wanted to have the Board of Ed see it tonight. We're eager to send it out to the community tomorrow. You saw the white paper, the lengthy white paper, which hopefully answered a lot of your questions, and we thought that the team put that together rather thoughtfully. So what we want to do now is just talk about, what are the reasons why we want to change from the current schedule in a very concise way, and Scott's going to do that. And then talk a little bit more about what are the benefits of the AB block schedule, and then talk about professional learning and communication. So Scott, I can't compliment enough. He was instrumental in every phase of the process. He's had experience with the schedule in Vermont. He tried to champion it a few years ago, and it didn't quite work, but it's coming to fruition now. So Scott Webster, our instructional leader, who, by the way, as you know, is a son of Wilton and a Wilton High School graduate. Scott.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, so the schedule we have today is the same schedule that I had as a freshman in 1980-something. And it worked well back then, but really isn't serving the most optimal purpose in Wilton in 2019. We have 8 different daily schedules with one period dropping every day, which is confusing even still for me, and very frenetic. Students are constantly rushing around to numerous commitments. Our 40 to 45-minute daily classes can seem rushed, especially if you start the class out and then all of a sudden the bell rings. It's off to gym or off to science, or it's very chaotic. There's not, therefore, enough time to delve deeply into the course content. Teachers don't have enough time to provide individualized attention to students, and it's challenging to fully differentiate instruction. We have testing days, which are beneficial to students, assessment days, so they don't get so many assessments in one day. But on the other hand, it can prove very difficult to align with the curriculum and the pacing that we need to do as teachers. And so based on many recent studies and data from surveys, as you're fully aware, student stress levels are at an all-time high. And it's definitely time to address that. It's time for a change. As Bob said, Kevin and I have taught on block schedules, he more recently than I, so we can really speak to the benefits of an alternating block schedule.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. So I, coming from Fairfield, we had a schedule much like Wilton's, and then for the last 2 years I was there, we made the switch to block scheduling. So it was an interesting transition, and I know a lot of our staff, we were also apprehensive, but definitely I drank the Kool-Aid, as they say, right, immediately after I saw the benefits of it. So some of those are, we keep bringing up the idea of stress level, and that essentially is the notion that, think about how chaotic it is to sort of shift gears when you're going from one meeting, let's say, to another, and then because we have such a varied curriculum, which is wonderful, but it's also for the brain a little tough to make those real shifts and transitions. And so you can imagine in a 45-minute amount of time, think about how long it's taking a student to recall where they left off, and then not to mention everything else that is going on in their life. So let's say that opening takes 10, 15 minutes, then you're almost down to 30 minutes of instructional time, and then in the last 5 minutes they're thinking about what they have to do next. So what I found especially was I had not thought, as Bob mentioned, we have more minutes, literally more minutes of instructional time, but sort of hidden minutes that I hadn't considered living through the process were, if I'm seeing a class for close to 90 minutes, but it's only once, then things like an opening and closing activity only happen once. Whereas if I take that same 90 minutes and split them into 2 45-minute segments, you still need to do that opening activity, and so you're gaining about 8 to 12 minutes every time you've met as a block versus the 45-minute daily. So that's sort of like that was a hidden thing that I hadn't even considered as a real great benefit. And to that end, as a result, you have more time in class to complete the sort of deeper learning like inquiry, research, etc. One of the things that we thought about in our committees were the fact that it's much easier, as I alluded to, with the 7 or 8 different things in a day, knowing for a student they come into the day focusing on 3 or 4 at most subjects. The notion that we have more time to reflect on information throughout the course of the day, I think we had professional development, and we've talked about this here at Wilton, in terms of preparing teachers for this process, because as you can imagine, the expectation is not for us to stand in front of a class for 90 minutes and lecture. That's not practical, and nobody could sit through that. Adults can't, let alone kids. And so what we worked on extensively was a more student-centered learning approach. And what I discovered too, as I kind of came back to the 45-minute schedule here, is that the students, and I believe it's because so many instructors in Fairfield were modeling similar teaching styles with student-centered learning, that within a few months it wasn't a big deal to have the students get into student work, simply a turn and talk and those sort of things, and they knew what the expectation was, because they weren't constantly just being talked to from a sort of directed teacher-directed model. And so I think that was also a real benefit, was that teachers really had a chance to rethink how they were going to teach, because they had to, and they came up with some wonderful ideas, and they adopted it. And a lot of that came from other teachers in the building, as they really thoughtfully prepared lessons that would work in this system. So, and that really did galvanize us, so that we were excited about that. They, because of this time to kind of ease into things, students and staff have more time to build relationships in class. Also, it might seem a little bit pedantic, but just it's a straightforward schedule. It's much easier to wrap your head around. Plenty of time for students to complete assessments, because now they have that day in between. So everything isn't due immediately, and everything literally meaning all 8 periods, right? And so that's a real benefit. 2 days for teachers to plan, of course, that's also nice for us. More time for teachers to plan in longer blocks of time. It's also not that it doesn't really matter for us, right? It's really about the kids. But one thing I did notice, you can imagine, you have that 45-minute prep, and you feel like by the time you make some phone calls and you're about to do something, that time, you have like 10 minutes, so you think, well, now I want to prepare for the next class. So sometimes it's like that 45 minutes is just long enough to do 1 or 2 but it's really not advantageous, whereas this would be obviously great. Schedule is similar to what students will experience in college. That was something we brought up because that's where so many of our students end up, so we want to prepare them and give them those advantages. As Bob mentioned, there will be 2 main schedules, one for regular school days and for Warrior Days. And you already mentioned, Bob, about how the Warrior Days, Blue Days provide opportunities to continue to connect with students through our advisory program, so we're not losing that, which I think is a real strength of our current schedule, something we didn't have really fleshed out in Fairfield as well. They were just starting to adopt that model. So, and then the Warrior White Days, as you mentioned, provide students with opportunities for engagement, inquiry, communication, interpretation, and including meeting with teachers, counselors, support staff, even attending workshops, enrichment, collaboration, and more. Also, Scott mentioned the need for having assessment days for a lot of the core subjects, so that students weren't having 6 tests on one day. This schedule also takes care of that issue. It just fixes that problem. Also, there's the notion too, there isn't really a need for artificial midterm and final exam weeks, because the amount of time that you have in a class is so similar to an exam period in length for testing, so there's some of that. And I think that's it. I mean, there are so many more things, but those are some of the key things that we sort of experienced.
So teachers can test based on student readiness. When they're ready, they don't have to cram in 4 days for the midterms and the finals, and then we'll gain back some instructional time. So that's just value added. Some would be disappointed missing those shorter days, but I think, we make them quality instructional days, and it's a total benefit, Regarding professional learning, Kevin talked about November 6th. When we went out to Fairfield, it was just really compelling listening to teachers, students, administrators, coordinators, all spoke very positively about this schedule. So that was a bit of a turning point. Next Thursday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, we are actually sending 9 educators out to visit schools for the full day, including administrators and coaches. And then we have 15 teachers going out for half a day. And the expectation is they'll bring back best practices, their observations, and share them with their departments. The other teachers will stay here at the high school and they'll work in collaborative IETs. And the purpose is to redesign units, redesign lesson plans for the block. So that's what's going to be going on next Thursday at Wilton High School. It's really going to be all about teacher preparation to get ready to really engage in and plan for the instructional shifts that are required. Any other teachers who want to be released for a full day, we'll make sure they have the opportunity to go and visit as long as we can get subs. We've been working with Maria so that we have ample coverage, but we want to send other teachers out who may not have the time to go all on the 14th. Our instructional coaches are going to be going out with us. You know, we're going to get them really well steeped in the research and the practices around block schedule teaching so that they can be part of the coaching process with our teachers, which is important. We have a bi-weekly newsletter that we've been sharing, so we've been pushing out research articles and best practices on block scheduling in what we call our Warrior bi-weekly update, so the Warrior newsletter. We have some teachers here, 3 of us actually, who taught on this schedule, and so I think that having the advantage of having a Scott Webster or a Kevin Cottalese who can work with teachers and guide them in their thinking and their planning and best practices, we think that's going to be a wonderful opportunity. And then I think people are going to be excited about this. 2 weeks at the end of the year, after our seniors leave for internship, and most of them do, as we know. So from May 20th to the 31st, we're going to do a trial run. You know, we feel at that point our teachers will be prepared. We will have communicated it really, really well with students and families through some of the opportunities Don's going to talk about. And, you know, we'll be ready. I think that trial run will hopefully get students primarily and teachers at a comfort level. I think just a positive mindset and a growth mindset that we can do this, and this is going to be good for teaching and learning at the high school. So that's going to be a really good opportunity just to pilot and give it a trial run. Don's going to talk about some of our great communication plan here, and then we'll answer questions or share any further thoughts.
Well, just briefly, first I'll say that the schedule itself is the product of a very, very transparent and inclusive process to even get us to this point. At every step attended by committees that were well populated by faculty and parents and students, and all stakeholders were in on the process as it unfolded. Now that we have the schedule, we're going to enhance the communication to all of our learning community so people know what's coming. And that began back in November when Bob sent a letter to all of our parents and students and faculty regarding the bell schedule and how it'll look. And of course, our rising 8th graders are going to have a special interest in that, and we introduced the idea of the bell schedule to them at the 8th grade curriculum night the other night so that they're aware of it. We'll continue to do that in the orientation process as we get to know them better. And then we have a series of focus group type sessions planned where we can talk to stakeholders and help them understand what the schedule is going to be like. So for example, coming up in February, actually on February 20th, there are going to be 2 information sessions for our students where they can come either before or after school for an hour each time and hear a presentation on the schedule and what it's going to look like and how it'll feel for them. And along the same lines, 2 parent coffees on February 27th for an hour in the morning and again in the afternoon so that parents can get acquainted with the schedule and ask any questions. And there, in addition to the professional development that Bob described, we have a series of faculty focus groups through faculty meetings and other gatherings where we've talked about the block schedule and help the faculty get acclimated to it with the help of thinkers like Kevin and Scott. So we feel we have a communication plan that's going to make this well known to our entire learning community so that it won't be a surprise and it'll be very familiar to people when we enact it. Thanks.
We'll open up to any questions or observations you may have.
Questions, comments?
Just a few quick ones first. On the Warrior White days, will the students know the teachers are in their classrooms so that they can be found? So that would be the expectation, is the teachers would be in their classrooms during that time?
Yeah, so we're gonna structure that. Couple facets of that. You may have noticed there's no passing time to that. So
Right.
that long block is designed for students to be, some students will go from world languages to the library, others may go to the class right next door. So that's a fluid period. And yes, what we plan to do, certainly in the beginning, we want to structure it so it's effective and we have clear expectations. So teachers can have sign-up sheets of students who may need to come in for extra help, enrichment, make up a quiz. We're going to need to know where people are and be able to communicate that to students. So again, with the planning we're going to do this year, and then with a little bit of lead time at the beginning of next year, we just want to set it up for success, and that's a good idea and an example of how we plan to do so.
Okay. No test days. So would it be possible on any given day I might have 4 tests?
It's possible, but what's going to happen is this. Our master scheduler, sitting to my left, is going to try to...
3 masters in last time you described me. I've fallen in grace. We're going to try to make sure that the core subjects don't line up that way 4 in a day, balanced so that you'd have math and science one day, humanities the other day, and if Power School fails in that endeavor, then we'll try to do some hand scheduling to make sure the kids don't get... That's going to remain a paramount concern, the idea that we don't tax students in that way, because it's stressful for kids, number one, and number two, you don't find out what they really know and can do if you have faulty testing conditions. So we're not going to abandon that maxim.
Okay.
So that's going to be that's going to be a goal. I was talking with a couple of faculty members who have students who are experiencing the schedule right now. I won't mention the districts, but I'm hearing, and I think it's just a challenge as you build a schedule to really fine-tune it and refine it. I'm hearing about situations where you have the 4 cores on one day and maybe more electives on another, but we're going to have a real good lens on that. And as well, if you have teachers who teach 5 classes, and if they have 3 of one and 2 on the other, you want to try to consolidate preps on the A and the B day or the C and the D day. So we'll work on that.
Delayed openings, you just squash the schedule?
Yeah.
Okay. And then my real question is, as I look through the white paper and I hear you talking tonight, I hear a lot of objectives and reasons for doing this and potential benefits that you saw when you went out and looked at the other schools. But I don't hear any discussion around how it impacts academic performance. And so what has your research or your observation shown you is what can we expect academically as a result of this?
It's very mixed, really. We looked at a lot of different research, and we did so because we wanted to. We also did so because originally there were some proponents and some who were less inclined to. So I think we have to be clear. We're not saying that it's not a panacea. It's not a solution for everything. I personally am not predicting an increase or a decrease in academic performance. I think that with the district's goal around personalized learning, critical thinking, our 21st century learning expectations, I think that in terms of the quality and the richness of the learning that we can achieve in longer periods with thoughtful planning and collaboration among colleagues, I think that can really pay us some dividends. I would anticipate still very strong performance from our students with the schedule, and I'm encouraged by the idea that we're actually increasing instructional time, albeit nominally. I think that was one of the things that we talked about as a team, that we felt that was just really, really important. So if you look at it, as you can imagine, there are bodies of research out there on any type of schedule, and we took a thoughtful look at it. So just honestly and objectively, that's my response to that. Others who reviewed it, Kevin?
Echo that. That was one of the first things we were looking at as well, because similar to Wilton, I think it read that you looked at a schedule change in '06, but decided to stay with the current one. And in Fairfield, they were doing the same thing in '04, '05, and decided to stay with the same one. But literally there was no evidence that showed one way or the other that one improved or degraded test scores. So.
And since they've done it, what, 3-4 years now?
Yeah,
There's been-
well, anecdotally, I would say
Okay.
my experience in those 2 years was, I was concerned, as many of us were, about, without maybe an everyday approach, would there be sort of a loss in some way? But it was actually the opposite. There was more retention, which, as I sort of reflected on that, it did make sense, right?
Right.
Because as you delve into something more, it takes less time to recall that. And then the type of learning you're doing really tends to stay with you over a much longer period of time than sort of this shallow, where you just feel like you're kind of experiencing the information but not really letting it sink in. So I can say, just from my own personal experience and my colleagues, our students were performing better. But as far as if you go and do the research, there wasn't any, in terms of test scoring, there wasn't any increase or decrease that was notable, so.
Well, we want to make sure that there are some sort of measurements in place, because we would certainly, even if it doesn't contribute to a great increase, we certainly don't want to go the other, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen either. So there's got to be some sort of measurements in place that we're looking at to make sure that's happening. Okay.
Yeah, that was my question. I mean, obviously, a great deal of thought has gone into this. I look at the committee members, there's a lot of time and effort and energy. And the anxiety issue among the students is really important. It's very sensitive, and if this helps that, I think it's great. But what is the measure of success? If we look back 2 years from now, how do we know that this is the right thing to do? I mean, what is it that we're trying to achieve? And anxiety is a difficult thing to measure. You do it through surveys or whatever, and maybe you'll get a sense of that. But are there any tangible measures or tangible objectives that we're trying to achieve here that we can look at 2 years down the road and say, wow, this is really a success. We should have done this 10 years ago. Why didn't we?
Our climate survey data will speak to that.
Okay, yeah.
Well, part of that is that, kids talk about their experience at the high school.
Yeah.
And, how they experience teachers, how they experience classes, and that notion of frenetic pace comes through loud and clear.
Oh, yeah, no,
So
I
as a
understand.
measure,
Yeah.
even, separating from whatever
Yeah.
reports about anxiety, but
Yeah.
just their lived experience, I think will be one profound indicator of success or
Yeah.
not. And then, Kevin's point, what their instructional experiences are. You talk to many kids today, and what they'll tell you was, I'm so busy, studying for the test, I forgot to learn anything.
Yeah.
And so as we talk about, what the 21st century demands are, the idea of having 85 minutes to do some depth, theoretically, ought to very positively impact that question and concern, and we can certainly measure that.
And there's another way to ask the question too, on another body of research to turn to, although the body of research on block schedules per se doesn't illuminate the question of achievement in a very substantial way. There's a lot of research that shows that when you enact the kind of teaching and learning methods that we want to go along with this block schedule, will improve things like student wellness, student cognitive engagement, and standardized test scores.
Okay,
The
well,
kids
there-
are immersed in this kind of
Yeah.
thing where it's performance-based and deeper and authentic and leading to more performance tasks that require more independent inquiry and more critical thought, which is the hallmark of what happens in the block. You wouldn't necessarily need a block to do that, but having it sure fosters it. And research is pretty clear that that kind of thing pays dividends.
Hey, I'm all in.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. This is, I think, a really smart move, based upon all the surveys and the information we have in front of us about how our students are doing. So if this will help in any way, I'm there. I just want to know that we've got some objectives in place that are going to tell us, was it the right thing to do 2 years, and when we look back, where did we excel, and where did we fall short, and what happened, is all I'm wondering about. But no, I think it's, we start tomorrow. Okay. Really.
I think this is a really well thought out plan and proposal, and thanks for all the work to everybody. I personally think the most important piece will be the instructional experience that students have. And some of the reason I think that there was so much resistance when the concept emerged, 15, 20 years ago, was that teaching, was a certain style. And, as we really try to practice more student engagement and depth and transdisciplinary experiences and student choice and student voice, it naturally will lead to some sort of restructuring of time. So I think it's a valuable resource, and I'm glad that you're going to embark this way. I do want to ask a couple of questions about where are the teachers, and you talked a little bit about instructional time, and because you sort of mentioned science teachers in particular, and I have heard a little bit of sort of questioning earlier on about instructional time in science, and is that hurt or is that helped? And then you talk about the professional sort of development and exploration for most of the teachers. So kind of where do you think they are? It's been a while since it's been talked about and
Right.
studied. So as a group, do you think that this will be, I'm assuming because the proposal is here that you feel the faculty is basically ready. So I just need to hear a little bit about that.
Sure.
I mean, I feel we have like a watershed moment on that point when we were visited by faculty from some sister schools.
Okay.
Because there was skepticism, as you'd expect among engaged critical thinkers about that, how this will look. And having heard from especially the Fairfield teachers of math and science and STEM about the impact on instructional time and the impact on student learning, that was a pretty positive, resounding endorsement. Almost unanimously saying there is no downside to this in that regard. And when our teachers heard that, I was in a few of those sessions, math and science. I'm not saying that everyone was immediately converted like it was a Billy Graham crusade, but it was close. And I think that we're in a better place now. I think most people realize that the data we have from schools in the DERG that have done this is very encouraging on that point. Did I interrupt you?
No, that's science. When we reached the decision to build in the minis, so science was really.
So by minis, you mean like the Warrior White Days?
No, so
something
science.
else?
The science. We spent a lot of time talking about science and NGSS, the new standards, which are very important. And science, as you know, right now has the double labs. They have increased instructional time, and one of the conversations we had probably at every planning meeting was around science and instructional minutes. So we reached the decision to build in what some people call minis or skinnies. So science will still have 2 periods, and they'll have essentially a mini, which we could call a 45-minute period in the context of the schedule, like a 42.5-minute period, where they'll have that in addition to the block. So
A
that
mini is
really,
half a full block.
yeah.
I got it, okay.
Yeah,
All
so
right.
they'll have it, not unlike now where they have a double lab twice in the 8-day cycle.
So it's 1.5.
They'll have a mini once in the 4-day cycle. So essentially they're relatively the same in terms of instructional time. And that was, I think, a turning point for science. I think rightfully so. They were concerned about the advent of NGSS. Obviously very rigorous and in-depth AP courses. And so that was a decision that we made. We actually met with Dr. Smith and Maria and some of the WEA, and that was one of the shared agreements that we have going forward. So that was a big factor. Other than that, the departments have really bought in. I mean, we're hearing from a lot of teachers they're very excited about this and having the increased length in the periods. Objectively speaking, math was a little bit concerned at first. They really thought that 60 minutes would. Everybody wanted longer periods and fewer passes. I mean, every single department. Math originally felt that if we could get something closer to 60 minutes, I think we need to work more and more thoughtfully with the math department to make sure that they are ready, and they are some of those teachers who are going to go out and observe the other schools and the block schedule. And if we have to bring in some veteran math teachers who have a level of expertise and experience with this and are good good at teaching adults in the adult learning realm, I think that could be an opportunity for them. Other than that, the departments really have been you have a finger on the pulse of the teacher sentiments, Scott.
Yeah, it really was great.
Yeah.
That was some of the best PD we've had, was having those Fairfield teachers come in to speak to each individual department, because we all have different needs and questions and issues. So for them to be able to answer those specific questions was amazing, and it brought up a lot of other great benefits to block scheduling that I had forgotten about or didn't even realize. So, and I just remember too from my previous school, they've had a block schedule now for about 25 years, and I remember talking to some of my math teachers there, and I was like, well, what did you think about it? And they were all petrified of the schedule. They're like, we don't know what to do, and they would never go back. They love it, and they've adjusted and adapted, and it really is what's best for students. And as these guys alluded to, having that ability to really focus more on student-centered learning and that real performance-based learning and teaching, that's what we're all about these days. So.
Great.
So I have a couple of comments, I guess. One is obviously, I think we need to, I mean, you've talked, when you've come and talked to teaching and learning, that it's gonna be an ongoing thing. So, you know, nothing's gonna be set even after 2 years, as long as it's going in the right direction. But one thing I'm, would like to see going forward is close attention paid to science. And are we getting the benefit back from the 2.5 every 4 things? And also, the flip side is, what other disciplines would benefit from that? Because I understand the double labs in science, but if you've had an extra half period every 4 days in social studies or in world languages or in music, I think that would help all those kids. So I'm curious about that just going forward, especially as we're going, and they'll, the high school at some point will have a shrinking, smaller enrollment than they have currently. I know it's still, a while down the road, but just, especially with all the attention we've had with math, I think that all the disciplines should be taken into, that's just something I would be curious about going forward.
Excellent point, thank you.
Anything else? Great, well, thank you very much.
As always, thank you so much for your support, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your work.
Yeah,
Thanks.
good luck.
Thank you, thank you.
Wilton Public Schools Alternative School Program,
Great.
continue that discussion.
So we want to welcome back Eileen Whaler, Melissa Barrett, Kim Zemo. We also want to welcome Drew Kaladi and 2 of our friends from Middlebrook, who I neglected to acknowledge when we were here last week, Tanya Leonard and Bonnie Schnitzler. So this whole gang is going to come forward. So there are several key areas that we want to revisit tonight after last week's conversation. The first, there were some questions around ensuring appropriate academic rigor in the program design. So tonight, Drew and Eileen are going to spend some time with us and share some examples of what that can and will look like. There was questions about the student profile, and so Kim will take us through that piece. And then there were also follow-on questions about the referral process, so Eileen's going to speak to that. After the conversation last week, the team went back and I think recognized from some of the board conversation and as well as some comments we received after the fact that the selection process sounded confusing. And so we had, on one hand, describing the program as a part of our continuum of services, and on the other hand, also expressing this desire to have it be a program of choice. So the team went back and they're going to clarify that tonight. And really the understanding is this is absolutely a program that's part of our continuum of services. We have kids that we know today who have kind of unique needs who would benefit from this, and those are the kids we are targeting at the onset, with the understanding as the program, if approved and established, as it grows and matures, will create some opportunities in the future for kids who may be outside of that profile. So, but these guys will go into depth on that. And then Tanya and Eileen are also going to spend a little bit of time at the end of the conversation from them with just some further input about the instructional day. So welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, I guess I'll get started. I'm Drew Kaladi. I'm a social studies teacher here at the high school. I've been teaching here since the spring semester of 2013, and this is my 5th year teaching a flex class. I've been asked to discuss project-based learning and address the rigor involved with this process. And I'll start by saying that at our best, we utilize project-based learning in mainstream classes as well. So much of what I discuss here connects to the approaches and expectations we have in mainstream classes, especially as we move into the block schedule that we just discussed. In the context of the flex and alternative high school format, project-based learning is simply engaging students in a more personalized way in order to access the curriculum that already exists. So rather than approaching the content in some rote manner like, let me tell you the story of how a bill becomes a law, which if I started to launch into that lecture, we'd all tune out, nobody would learn anything. Yeah, that's a bad approach no matter what the setting. So instead of doing that, we can approach the content in a way that maximizes engagement and personalizes the experience with the needs of the learner. So I can tell a specific story to illustrate this, and in doing so can show how this learning connects to the content standards of our curriculum as well as some Common Core standards. And I had the pleasure of working with a student who I believe spoke at the last meeting last week. It was Isabella Siegel.
So I worked with her last year, and we accessed the government curriculum in a unique way that were, in this way was particular to her needs and interests and played to her strengths without ignoring, the need to develop important academic skills. So a little bit about her story. After the tragic events at Stoneham Douglas High School, Isabella, she was moved to ACT and she organized a rally. And it was clear that, after she did this, this would be our most successful access point to the government curriculum, and we quickly shifted to develop projects centered on her activism. So should we go to the next slide? And that's a video there in the middle. Any chance that works, hopefully. Should be able to play. Let's see. Oh no. Well, if we can't get it to play, that's okay. So what I have in there was actually a scrolling time-lapse look at the process that we engaged in as we were working on a particular project in this. So it was a Google document, and what you could see are all of the work that we put in, to this project. And this was a speech that Isabella worked on, and a speech she then delivered to around 11,000 people in Hartford, Connecticut during the March for Our Lives rally. Since we can't see the specifics, I can tell you about it. This project, it was driven by Isabella, and it was a job of her teachers, and this quickly became an interdisciplinary project, as project-based learning really does allow for that. So we had some English teachers involved as well. So our job was to guide her, challenge her, and help her find success, and she found it. This project, in the process of, revolving around, it required her to write an argumentative speech. She had to utilize extensive research. She had to evaluate that research with regards to the information provided, and also with regards to evaluating for validity and perspective. And then she had to synthesize and implement all of this information as support for her argument that she wanted to deliver. So what does Rigor look like in the setting? It was, Rigor is refusing to accept easy answers. It's engaging critically with the research materials. It's trying out arguments that ultimately do not work, throwing those out, and discussing why those arguments don't work. It's finding arguments that do work and understanding why they do. And it's Rigor here is revision after revision after revision until the student finds success. And in this particular example, Isabella learned how a bill becomes a law because she had to, because through the course of working on this project, this information became important to her. Because she learned how members of Congress represent their constituents and how they win elections, because she needed to discuss that in her argument. She learned how branches of government interact because she needed to be, to present that information and present an informed viewpoint. So she engaged in the content of the curriculum without the need to piece it together unit by unit in a traditional fashion. And I think this is the power of project-based learning, and this is how this leads ultimately to meaningful work. This is a video here, and I wonder if we had trouble playing the other one, we might have trouble here. This is from a different speech that she gave, and it doesn't look like we're going to be able to play it.
Just sign in?
What's that?
Yeah, I think if you sign in.
If I sign in?
Yeah,
Okay,
I
I can
think
do
so.
that.
While he's doing that, I almost need to have Drew go back and reread that last section, because he just described to a T, right, what the goals are of a project-based approach. And I think if you stop to think about it, you can draw a clear dichotomy between more kind of didactic, traditional instruction versus what the student's experience was, and the opportunity to synthesize, but also to take part in the process, which is really ultimately the gift here. So we have at least one young person who, through that experience, participated authentically in the political process,
And continues to do so.
And any of those victims could have been my friends, my teachers, or even me. The Thursday after the shooting, I was sitting in my dad's office at my house, tears in my eyes, confessing to my father how truly scared I was for me and everyone else that I love. I felt overwhelmed, and all the fear that I had been compressing for so long came rushing up. I had to make a change, and if no one else could do it, it was up to me. My dad reached out to Jeremy Stein and Connecticut Against Gun Violence, who said they would enthusiastically support the efforts of me and my friends. Their help organizing was crucial. They really know their stuff. 6 days later, I'm standing on the gazebo in Ballard Park in Richfield, staring out to a sea of over 100 supportive and passionate people, including several prominent politicians, all who were there to support our efforts. I see Jeremy Stein, whose unwavering and incredible support paves the way for change. I see high school students from all over Fairfield County who feel just as passionate as I do and are more than ready to take action. The youth is our future, and I witnessed that firsthand. From the March for Our Lives in Hartford, to writing letters to congresspeople, to one-on-one meetings with legislators, the teens have infiltrated, and we're not leaving anytime soon. So who better to lead the charge than the youth of today? That first rally in Richfield sparked Connecticut Teens Against Gun Violence, and with incredible support from Connecticut Against Gun Violence, we have been fighting for sensible gun laws. All we want is to feel safe. All of these rallies, these marches, these luncheons, they are here for one thing and one thing only: the safety of our community, our country, our schools, our malls, our movie theaters, our parks, our concerts, and especially the safety of our youth. I can't thank Jeremy Stein and Connecticut Against Gun Violence enough for giving me and TAGV a platform and opportunity to fight for our safety. We will not stop until we feel safe. This movement cannot end after the roar dies down, and the next awful event takes the limelight. The more this is discussed, the more attention this gets, the more work will be done. Connecticut Against Gun Violence is doing just that, and I couldn't be more hopeful. The work has just begun.
So that is an example of, a very positive example of what this type of project-based learning can lead to.
And, she shared openly last week about her anxiety issues. So again, this is an example of we're not putting a kid in a room and we don't want them to work through their issues, but the skill development to allow her to get up in front of all these people and work through that, I think is just so powerful. Proud of her.
Right, and the practice that went into it also, not only just the doing the speech with me, with her friends in Flex Lab, but the writing process, the editing and revising piece, and how many times we had gone back to that speech and back again until it was exactly the way that she wanted it. It was incredible, and I do believe that there was a lot of rigor in both of those activities.
You good? Okay, so the next piece is the profile of the Genesis applicant, which is in your packet. We tried to really list, which is hard to do because every individual kid that comes up we'll be looking at, but really wanted to get the main areas of concern. So this program would be open for students that are showing significant concerns or at risk for the following internalizing and externalizing behavior. And you can see the list there. I think it's important to note that their lack of academic progress is over a period of time, and we have tried multiple interventions with limited to little success. It's also important to note that while some students may respond to the interventions that we try to put in place to re-engage them once they've been school avoidant or are having difficulty accessing the curriculum, there is another group of students that no matter what we try, it's just not working because they really need an alternate setting that can allow them the safety to really begin to stabilize and work on skill development. And those are the students that, Lori, as we talked last week, I think there's concern about whether we're going to have everything up and ready and be 100%. And those students that are sitting now and that have been sitting, and it's just not safe for them to really do the work that they need to be able to access the curriculum. We can't wait another year to really service those kids. So this team feels very confident that we will, and we're going to take you through a timeline later, that we can be ready and up and running in September for those students that we feel it's critical that they need that alternate setting to begin the process of re-engaging.
And part of that timeline, of course, is the referral process, and the sooner that we can get approval, the sooner we can go ahead with that. So we did try to tighten it up a little bit. We came up with an application.
It is in the paperwork that you have. And the referral process in the first few years, I believe, is going to be, when we look at our most severely impacted students, they probably have IEPs and 504s. So let's really concentrate on the students that we need to service best first. So this small group that we would have go through the referral process, they would fill out the application. It could be with their parents. It might be a teacher or admin or through a PPT or a 504, that it would become a recommendation. And then we would have to meet as a team, special education teacher, a social worker, possibly district level if you're available, and admin, of course. So we'll have to think thoughtfully about who we have come into this program because we want it to be successful. And down the road, hopefully we can open it up to the greater population. So that is the goal. And then you, as I said, you saw the application process in here. And did you have any specific questions about the referral process?
So we just got, or
Right.
seen this for the first time here, so we didn't get ahead. Sorry.
So you
So,
haven't been able to review it.
Yeah,
didn't
and
know
just
if
as
you-
part of the process.
I just was
you will
explaining why
have-
we didn't have questions.
Yeah, there were questions sent in advance. The board got the answers
Yes.
a week ago. As new questions come up, I don't think, we can certainly take time next Thursday if we want to continue the deliberations, and certainly on the 21st, when I'm going to be asking you to take a vote, there'll be time there too to continue to deliberate.
I think the important piece is that a student can't just be placed
Right.
or dumped in a program, that there is a thoughtful process that they have to go through, and that we're making sure, it's the right fit for their success, and that the 504 or PPT process would approve that student as a candidate.
It also addresses because there were some questions last week about if a parent says, I want my kid to come to this school, there are some guidelines in there of what the procedures would be to address a parent concern for a student who's not receiving services through a 504 or IEP.
And then the last page that we have in that packet is, it's sort of our timeline. Some of the things we've already covered, but if this was to be approved, we would try to follow this as best as we can. And like we had said earlier, the sooner we can get going on this, the better. So, okay.
How long, I know each student is different and would
Yeah.
progress at their own pace, but would your expectation be that a student would graduate from this
Not-
school, or would they transition back?
Not necessarily. I think the goal is always to try to bring students back when they're ready, if they have the skills necessary for that. The beauty of this program is that it's so close that we can
Right.
begin to transition them slowly and let them access some of the courses. There may be some students that might stay, but I think our goal, and when we're working with students, we're always setting goals in terms of how do we transition back into the least restrictive environment that's going to be most like real life world experiences for them. So.
You had mentioned how difficult that is when kids are already out.
It's so
It's
difficult. We don't
extremely
get them back
difficult, yeah.
because it's, the transportation alone usually doesn't allow for them to access our courses, much less extracurricular. So again, the beauty of having a program so close is they can still feel a part of the school culture because they'll have the opportunity to participate in extracurricular and things like that.
I also think there's a better alignment in the curriculum that will be offered there
Absolutely.
and the curriculum that's offered in outplacements.
And that's another area where you lose. We look at some of these programs talking about losing the rigor, and they're not up to par in terms of what kids are getting at the high school. And these are bright kids, and we want the best for them. And I think we're going to have more control with our own curriculum and staff in doing that.
Well, for me, last week, there were some questions asked of Andrea, and there was one thing that she said that was like a real light bulb moment for me, because we were asking a lot of questions about cost savings
Right.
and all of this. So just to be clear for anybody who's listening, is that at least initially, it's not our intent to take all the kids who are currently outplaced and bring them all back in and put them into this program, because that would be very disruptive to their
success.
their success and their education that they've been getting so far, but rather to take the kids that we know that are here now in our system and who have been identified and placed. So it's more of a cost avoidance versus a cost savings, that over time, we will see savings because we'll be able to educate those kids within our own district versus sending them out. So that was like a great moment for me anyway, because that was not my understanding. And then this tonight is helpful because I was still having concerns with like just our conversation back and forth. I was afraid that a message was being sent out that this was open to everybody. So if you're considering going to private school, maybe instead of doing that, you could put your child here. And so I think the communication needs to be very clear as to what this is and what it is not, and who fits into this program. So this document that you presented us tonight is a really good step in that direction to help clarify that. And probably most specifically is that this first year will probably be filled by kids who you may have already kind of identified as possible students. So it's not like, so I just want to make sure we're not in a situation where we're getting a flood of applicants that parents have wrong expectations as to what this is and what this isn't. So that would be my only.
And some of those kids are on the precipice of, having to move into another program, so.
Right, and they may already be in an IEP or type of process already, so.
Correct.
But I think there's a large population of those students right now, I mean, just this year. I know just at Middlebrook alone, I've been working with Middlebrook, we have 4 already this year that, had this already been available. It would have been a no-brainer that this is where we would go. It's the hardest thing that I think we do when we have our PPTs with our students and we're placing them out of the district is, to try to understand what their curriculum is we don't have our hands in the pot anymore. We don't have the ability to make sure that rigor is there, that the curriculum is aligning up with our middle and high schools. We don't have that. We are putting our faith in these private schools, and we know that, in the best interest of the child, they're getting the social emotional support, but as far as the academic piece, we don't have that link. Oftentimes they will ask me, can you send over some math? We have that reciprocity, but certainly our teachers aren't doing the teaching. So this is just another way to make sure that we continue to own the curriculum for these kids. And 4 at Middlebrook alone, and then I have 2 already at the high school that I think we would put in tomorrow, so.
I'd like to add I know everybody's talking about the curriculum and the rigor, but I have to take note of the social skills groups and the DBT skills groups that we run, and I would say the well-oiled machine that we have at the middle school and high school to impact all of those students, and also sending those students out to outplacements. They don't have that strong counseling piece that we actually provide in the public school as well. So when we are often sending our students out, a lot of times they're getting less services just because it's a smaller setting. And for those of us that see it all the time, it's very, very frustrating because we have all of that training and all of those services right here, including our OTs and our speech and languages. So it goes just beyond the curriculum for us as well.
So does everybody know Tanya Leonard? So Tanya's phenomenal. I could go on. I should go on, actually. Tanya saves lives. The other night, a week ago, Friday, I was at Mohawk Mountain. Tanya is at Middlebrook, but she also runs our Youth to Youth program, and she's everywhere and does everything. So I was chaperoning my daughter's ski trip, and Tanya was there with 15 middle school kids, a handful of other veteran and 1 newbie, right, staff. But she pointed out one young, highly impacted student who may at some point be a candidate for this program, that through her relationship, through this program, brought him on a ski trip, first time out, paired him up with a couple of brilliant high school kiddos, and sent him up the mountain. And so I think those are the things we never think about. And certainly kids that are outplaced would never have that kind of opportunity with us. But those are the moments that a program like this with those additional community connections create that really contribute to that, the skill building, the development of the capacity for them to really transition back effectively. And it's just, we don't ever see it because we don't know about it, and
Right.
in many cases, we don't have the opportunity. So,
And the relationship piece is so critical,
Right.
and we develop those relationships when we're, working so diligently with families, and I can say for myself, I don't know about you guys, but when we do have to go to outplacement, it's a very emotional process for the family and for us that have been working with the kids. So to know that we might have an option in district to be able to do that is, I think is a great opportunity for strengthening our programs.
I was really struck by the number of parents who attended last week and who wrote to us this week, and just told us from the bottom of their hearts how much they wanted this program and how much it was filling a need that their children have. I didn't know, so I was really grateful to them for showing up and sharing those insights with us. Are there any more questions, comments, or?
No, I just wanted to say that, often as a Board of Ed member, when you see the outplacement, we're looking at just the numbers.
Yeah.
And the number of kids, the number of dollars, but I also think that this isn't just for the kids who would eventually become one of those numbers. There are a lot of kids that we don't hear about or know about who are going to benefit from this program. And it's so nice to see you there, Melissa, because I know, it seems like just yesterday you were, starting the Community Steps program. And there has to be some fluidity because depending on who's participating and, but also just the fact that these kids are part of our community and we want them to be part of Wilton High School or Middlebrook. And no parent wants a child, no one's like, I really want to outplace my kid or, it's just great that the fact that they'll have the ability and be using the curriculum. And thank you, Mr. Claudia, for sharing that story as well, because there are I think people don't also associate, being outplaced with academic rigor and just how important it is for these kids to be engaged and not just be, shelled off or not heard or noticed. So thank you for all this work.
If I may just make a point about the staffing, because Sharon made a good point earlier. If we use Drew as an example, he's teaching the flex class, but he also teaches humanities, he's taught AP courses. So one of the benefits of having our staff work with these students is they know the curriculum and the level of rigor and the ability of the students in our district. So that's really value added, and I think that should reassure the board and parents about the level of rigor in this program.
Great, good point. Is that it?
Just a couple of things. Thanks for all your research and your passion, and as I said last time, it's really exciting and creative, and you just want to be sure that as you move forward, that we've thought of everything and done due diligence, and I think you've done an amazing job. I really do. A couple of just little small questions. One is about the age range and the middle school students. And I can appreciate that there may be middle school students who need the program. I'm also wondering a little bit, especially since you had talked last time about not having the high school and the middle school together, which I'm not quarreling with, but I'm just wondering how isolating is that? Are you worried about that at all? You're taking, students out of a more traditional environment. They're very young. They're not necessarily going to interact, depending on how I read heard your description, with the high school students. So it seems like fairly isolated. So that was just a question, and if that's the best placement, I get it, but it does sound a little isolating.
A lot of those students are isolated within their middle school environment though also.
Okay.
So while they might be physically in the Middlebrook space, and you guys can speak way more to it, they're not engaged.
With their peers and their
Yeah,
classes.
they're isolated.
These are kids that, are not, they're isolated as it is in the bigger environment.
Okay.
I think this would be more comforting and safe for them to be engaged with the peers that are there and the teachers and the staff.
Okay, and then another question is, when you list the profile of the needs, some of them are severe. And as school psychologists and school counselors and school social workers, do you feel like you have enough of a safety net when we're not, or you're not, and this is not a criticism, but you're not necessarily trained in the psychiatric field. So do you feel like you have enough safety net to know, like, okay, this is even beyond us?
I think the staffing is for a social worker who has that clinical training specifically. I mean, I think we need to, as we review the profile of a kid, it'll be important to make sure we get all the data in terms of their current functioning, and whether they're appropriate or not. But I think having a social worker as part of the program, and then our connection with building the community resources is a critical piece, as well as making sure we have releases. Most of these kids have an outside treatment team, and that's going to be a critical piece to be able to have communication with them.
That makes sense.
And they may even weigh in terms of their level of
So
functioning.
you're able to.
Absolutely.
Because again,
that case management piece will be really
Yeah.
critical.
Okay.
Yep.
And then my last question would be around evaluation and assessment of the program. You know, if in fact the goal is to build student skills up so that they're able to interact perhaps in the more traditional high school, is that a goal? And, you know, like, just how will you evaluate? Like, how many kids can return, how soon they can return, or how safe they feel, or what their academic progress is. And again, I don't have the way you should evaluate it, but we'd love to, I think, as a board, sort of get some updates as to the success. And by that, I don't mean report cards,
Right.
but, you know, the growth of the students.
I think in the original packet, there was a coping skills inventory that we would use with the students pre and post, and how are they moving through. DBT, the skills that we teach, you know, they rate themselves using a index, a SUDS index, and that's diary cards where they keep on a daily basis in terms of the different skills and what are they using, and so all of that would go into, I think, their readiness and goal setting in terms of when they would be ready to maybe begin a transition back. But
Kim, with the understanding too that at least some of these students, if not many, would have IEPs, I imagine that written into those IEPs, there would be goals and
Yep.
objectives, so that would be another tool,
yeah,
I'd
that's
imagine.
another tool.
I want to emphasize too, just if I could, we've talked about that, actually, we were just talking about it the other day, last time we met, and it's such a great question, because there are going to be different ways that we're going to be measuring this, and I think that the most obvious thing that we would all think of would be, can we get them back into the high school or a more traditional learning setting? But honestly, we were talking more about work production and work completion and credit, you know, getting the credits and things like that as our first priority for these students. Because quite honestly, the work production and the attendance and their ability to function in any kind of a building outside of their home right now is so low. The threshold is so low that even those are probably going to be what's reported on most first. And then I think once you see that, I think our second goal is, can we get them, because quite frankly, some of these students may not ever get to that type of a setting, but as we know, higher education isn't a traditional setting all the time anyway, so it's okay. So we want to also make sure that the parents know, as well as the students themselves, that it's okay if that isn't the ultimate goal, as long as you are doing the work, getting the work in, getting your credits, and coming to school. There's going to be a lot of measures that I think that you'll see that will be, you know, a great report out for you to go.
I think some of that will be measured, to Sharon's point, in the service learning part of the program. So while they might not be coming back to a traditional academic environment, they're going to be showing their strengths through their counseling and exposure therapy by participating in service learning out in the community, which could really mirror some of the kind of post-secondary planning that some of them may have.
Okay. Thank you all so much for your time and
Thanks for having us.
effort. Yeah, thank you. Next up, review and discuss deliberations on the superintendent's proposed budget.
So we just kept this item on the agenda in case there were additional questions. Last meeting, last week, there weren't any additional questions. So
Is there anything we need to or should do or think about for our Board of Finance workshop or meeting with the Board of Finance next week?
No, we, Chairman Jeffrey DeSalvo and I haven't connected today. We traded texts and stuff, just to, what we had a preliminary talk about a couple weeks ago. We're not anticipating really anything too heavy to come up. You know, our budget is below their suggested guidance. So, no, we haven't received any specific areas of concern or anything like that. I don't know if you've heard anything in business ops.
No,
or
I
anything.
even asked the question this
Yeah.
morning. I would just hope that if the Board of Finance has any questions or
Right.
comments or, you know, clarifications or whatever, that the more work we
Right.
can do ahead of time, that would be helpful.
Right, no, I have received no indication that there will be other than just respectful top-line questions.
And Debbie, you'll be bringing flowers and chocolates for all of us. It's Valentine's Day.
That's right.
Right?
That's right, we're gonna have a big date.
Spend a lot of time together in the next week. So, just a reminder that we will have the public presentation on Monday night. So the, I took a quick peek at it, it's up posted. It's got a real zinger in the beginning, so I won't say any more than that.
Quoting you.
Where is that? Is that Middlebrook or here?
Middlebrook, at 7 o'clock, and then the workshop's at 7:30.
That's at 7:30 on
We're on a different day.
Oh, yeah,
On
it's
Thursday.
not following.
Oh,
it's a
no, no,
different
no,
night.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
no. We're so
That's gonna
used
be a
to
really
meeting
short
at 7.
presentation.
Just
Just
we're
half an
gonna race
hour.
over here, and,
Might be.
would anyone from the public like to come and make a comment? Seeing no one, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.